Hello and welcome to Fairwood Common. My name's Dawn Thomas and I'm the Gower Society Youth Activity Provider, funded by the Gower Society. And we're here today to talk to you about one of the most famous rivers on Gower, the River Ilston. Now, why are we in Fairwood Common if we're talking about the River Ilston? But in fact, the River Ilston starts at Fairwood Common, and there's quite a few sources to the river. But if you follow the dip behind me, this looks like a valley. If you follow that all the way up, you'll get to where the river starts. And when it's really dry, there'll be no water there at all. But you can still see in the landscape where that water comes out. And if you look carefully, you can see trees that follow the course. These are willow trees, and this shows you where the river is making a tiny little mark in the landscape here. Now, all that water is coming from precipitation or rain that's landing within the catchment area. And the Ilston catchment area goes from the edge of Fairwood Airport all the way along the horizon here and over to the highest points of the hills to my left here. Now, the highest point is only about 120 metres above sea level, and we're only about 5 or 7 kilometres away from the sea, so it's not a very big catchment, only about 30 kilometres square. But it does mean we can walk all the way from the source to the other end of the river, the mouth at Three Cliffs Bay, all in one day. And that's what we're going to do for you today and show you all the important points as we go along. So here's the River Ilston. Now, you might think that it's not much, but that's because we're so close to the source. And if you follow this river upstream, this riverbed, you'll get to the source in only about a kilometre. And at the source, all you'll see is like a boggy piece of ground. At this location, we actually can see that the river has a channel and it has a riverbed, and we have the banks either side. Now, there's not a lot of water in the river at the moment because it's been so dry. But when it rains over a lot of days, you end up getting the river going higher and higher till the banks can get full, and then it can flood either side and the local area can be underwater. Now, the reason this local area can get flooded is because the rock type here is millstone grit or marris. And this is an impermeable rock, so the water can't actually percolate through it into the ground. It has to flow along the surface as surface runoff, and it makes its way into the river very quickly. It's also very flat land because it can't be eroded because it's so strong. Now, when we get further down the river, we'll get a different rock type, and it's a very different story there. As we follow our tributary of the Ilston down from the source towards the village Ilston, it suddenly changes and there starts being much more water in it, and it's wider and it's deeper and it's faster flowing. And that's because there's more than one source to the River Ilston, and another of those sources, the tributary from that source, has combined with our river at a confluence. And as that river water heads towards Ilston village, you can see the result. It's much wider, the river channel, it's deeper water, and there's water moving fast. Just below Ilston Church, the landscape changes dramatically. No longer do we have this flat land of millstone grit, but we have valley sides. This is Ilston Valley, and the reason it's here is because of the change in geology. The geology has changed to limestone, and the limestone is actually very easy to erode. So when this valley was actually filled with water, when the glaciers actually melted about 6,000 years ago, this river was much broader and eroded its way through this limestone to create this large valley. Now, once all that water had gone into the sea, the river is much, much smaller now, but the valley remains. So as we follow Ilston Valley, we'll find what secrets lie there. If you follow the River Ilston through Ilston Valley, something strange happens, and you might be able to hear it. If you listen carefully, you'll hear a roaring sound. And that's because of the limestone here. Underneath my feet is actually an underground cave, because limestone has great big cracks in it, and the water gets in it and erodes those cracks and makes them bigger into these caves. Now, the water at this point has found a great big crack, and it's turned into a swallow hole. The water is actually being swallowed by the rock, And we no longer have an overground river, we have an underground river. And that's what you can hear, the water rushing down an underground waterfall into that cave. Now this location might look really, really safe, but in fact it's a very dangerous part of the river, because this swallow hole can actually move to different locations on the riverbed. And sometimes dogs can actually get sucked down into that swallow hole. And it's been known to kill those dogs because you can't get back up through the swallow hole. But if we look downstream from where we are, we no longer have that water flowing along. We have a pool of water. Beyond that, we have no water at all. So if you follow the river from then on, you're actually standing in a dry riverbed, and underneath your feet in the ground, you have the underground river, and you won't see the water again until we get to the Resurgence Point. At the end of Ilston Valley, the valley walls broaden out and we have a floodplain either side of the river. And that floodplain indicates that we're getting closer to the mouth of the river. And if you look for this chapel that's behind me here at the end of Ilston Valley, then you should be able to spot the Resurgence Point, which is where the rocks move so that the water no longer can make its way underground and will come up to the surface and join up with our overground river. And from now on, we have our river water actually in the river channel itself. If you want to find out what's actually living inside the river, then you can do some river dipping. But you can't just dip your net in, because all the animals in the river are hiding. So you have to do something called kick sampling. Now you can do this with 2 people or on your own. You need a net, and you need to place the net where the water is flowing quite fast through it. Make sure it's safe enough for you to go in and not too deep. Once the water is flowing through the net, you need to stand upstream of the net, and then you need to do a wiggle dance. And as you wiggle, your feet will move the stones out the way, and you'll end up digging a hole in the riverbed, and all the animals that are hiding underneath the rocks will be washed into the net in front of you. Once you've been wiggling for about a minute or so, you can then lift up your net, take it over to a bucket, and then you can empty it out and see what you've found. After Ilston Valley, the river gets closer to the mouth and it starts to change and slow down. So join us when we head to the mouth to Three Cliffs Bay. In Park Mill, the Ilston River actually joins with the Kithen Well at a confluence. And at that point, you can no longer carry on calling it the Ilston River. And because it's getting close to the sea and the mouth, we call it a pill in Wales. So here we have the Penarth Pill, and it's coming through Penarth Valley. And as it comes and carves its way through the landscape, it creates some enormous meanders. And those meanders slow down the water, and the water gets slower and slower until eventually it makes its way to the mouth. And at the mouth, the water just trickles into the sea across the sand. And that's the end of the story for the Ilston River. But it's not for the water itself, because of course the water in the sea is going to evaporate, turn into clouds, be blown back upstream, back into the higher land, and then it will precipitate down as rain and join back into our catchment area and back into the Ilston River. Now I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to actually join us face to face, please join us at our Gower Society Youth activity soon.